Recording is on.
Okay, I'm good to go, Rick.
Yep, you can go ahead.
So, welcome back to the GEO Indigenous Summit. This is the live session on disaster risk resilience and climate change, where we will hopefully cover disaster risk reduction and climate action as part of the discussions. Our opening speaker has possibly woken up for us. We have Gordon Ikayuach Brouwer, who is a whaling captain and Director of Planning of the North Slope Borough in the Alaskan Arctic. So let's go to his talk.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello, my name's Gordon Brouwer. My Eskimo name Inupiaq is Ikayuach, and I'm a whaling captain. And that's also the name of my whaling crew, Ikayuach crew. Up here, I live in Alaska, within the North Slope Borough in the Arctic. I serve as the planning director for the North Slope Borough, which is 89,000 square miles, which is the largest municipality in the United States. In my job, I oversee land management functions. I oversee the capital improvement annual process and work to balance and implement subsistence policies while promoting development to balance those activities together. So it's an important job. I've been doing that for quite some time, maybe almost 30 years now. So that's what I do for a living. I work at the pleasure of the North Slope Borough Mayor, Harry Brower Jr. And I am a member of the Barrow Whaling Captains Association, and I have been whaling since I was a little boy. And my talk today is going to be more focused on subsistence whaling, but I have conducted subsistence activities throughout my life, from hunting birds to caribou to seals, whales, inland, on the ocean, and on the ice. So with that, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the changes that we're seeing about our spring subsistence whaling activities. For decades and for millennium, we've hunted on the spring lead system, where we develop trails in March and start hunting in April and May for the bowhead whale. For the past years, the ice has been changing from multi-season ice to single-season ice. So there's a adaptation we're enduring to learn the predictability of younger ice, the strength of how we use that ice, because we have to live on that ice for weeks, even a month, to go and harvest a bowhead whale in the spring lead system, which is basically winter whaling. So I wanted to give an example about some experiences. We have, in the 1990s, experienced some 300 whalers that were broken off from the shorefast ice, and the ice shattered in the ocean, and the rescue effort to save 300 whaling crews members out on the ice was a huge rescue effort. And those are some of the kind of changes and unpredictability of the ice that we're watching out for. So the traditional knowledge that a person like me holds is what I've learned from my father, and the traditional knowledge that he used in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, in 1960s, 1970s. And what we're doing today is seeing some changes that the traditional knowledge is having to endure contemporary traditional knowledge, the use of the ice today, which is different. The ice dynamics have changed. So it's important for us to express these so that we can work together with science, modern technology, with the rest of the world and say, help us. Help us with our contemporary use and whaling activities on the ice that we've done for thousands of years. The only difference is the ice is changing, the weather is changing. We'd like to see gadgetry on our phones that we can tell whether the ice is thicker, where we can pull up a whale, how strong that ice might be, and be able to remotely sense where another big sheet of ice might come in and scave off the edge of the ice and potentially break off the ice and put you afloat, free floating in the ocean. So I think it's important now today to look at how science, traditional knowledge, and contemporary knowledge can work together for a safe subsistence activity up in the Arctic. And I think it's important. I'm very eager to participate in your conference. I appreciate the invitation, and I hope that this conference on Indigenous cultures is successful. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Gordon. So I think it would be really helpful to understand, how do you think that you can do that combining? How can you bring together the contemporary knowledge with that, the history, the historical knowledge that you talked about that's passed over decades? Can you talk a bit more about that? You talked about remotely sensing data to look at the available ice, the surrounding ice. Are you still there? Can you see me?
I could see you. This is Gordon.
Great. Did you hear my question?
Yeah, I did. Okay. Well, I think it's important, when you understand what we're doing, and I'm just going to focus maybe on a couple types of subsistence. One of them is I have fall fishing activities, which is also being impacted by ice, different kinds of ice development, and also the spring whaling, which is usually starts around our March and April time frame. That's basically wintertime up here still, all the way till May. So, well, the traditional knowledge of what we've used and passed on to, which I think is relevant still today, but it's gonna be more relegated to what we used to do. But today, with the contemporary youth, the contemporary person that is out there today and doing subsistence whaling is like having to relearn and adapt to the changing ice dynamics. It seems to me that science can detect those types of changes that we traditionally would use by sight, by visual sight, by being physically present, that you could use satellite imagery to be able to tell if that ice is 5 feet thick or if it's 2 feet thick, 2 feet. Yeah, you can cross over that, but you can't pull up a whale on 2 feet thick ice. But you can pull up a whale maybe at 5 feet, 5 and 6 feet thick ice. And the other kinds of information mixing contemporary, we have signal from one whaling crew to the next down the lead edge, and then we use radios and relay, and I could imagine when there wasn't no radio, how they would need to read the weather and look at the weather and the ice in order to. So I have used a science like a VHF marine radio and say, hey, another crew down the way, another mile down that way. I would say that there's a big piece of ice about 3 miles out coming this way with the current and the wind. It's going to impact down your guys' way. I suggest you guys move out and move your camp to shore. Using remote sensing, I would think that you could use real-time ice data to look at moving ice on like telephones or cell phones or something like that, and say and then we'd be having technology and like an elder in a box. You put an elder in a box in your phone and say, holy cow, there's a big piece of ice coming down this way. It's going to be probably 8 hours, and give me a lead time to move my camp. And one day we were able to talk more. I would talk as much as I would about what it means to go out and whale and live out on the ice for a long period of time.
Gordon, before you stop, we have this thing called Slido that we're using, and just so everyone's aware, if you go to Slido, slido.com, and put in GEO Indigenous Summit, all one word, you can ask questions to the speakers. We have a quick question just to qualify something, Gordon, from someone called Patricia Walsh, who's at the New Mexico State Parks, and she's asking, do the whalers hunt directly from the ice, not from the boats? Could you just clarify that?
All right. Well, we have 2 different whaling seasons. One's in the fall. The fall one is more like when we encountered the commercial whaling fleet in the 1800s and 1800s when they came up here, and we whaled with them. The Eskimos were already whaling up here, and we whaled with some of the commercial whalers. That's why my last name is Brower, I would suspect. And then the springtime whaling, we whale with our skin boats. I have a skin boat, and it can hold about 10 crew members, and we paddle after our whale. Sometimes, a lot of times when you select your spot on the ice, with having traditional knowledge, being able to select the right spot and on a point and a tip, you can have the whale come to you. That's how come we think the whales give themselves to you, because they actually come right to the ice when you select a spot. And I think that's another important thing about electronics and maps that are real time, and you download them. You can select your spot traditionally and say, oh, this spot right here on this map, let's make the trail to that. That's where the whales are going to come up, just the way it looks. And we know what features we're looking for in the ice to put a successful camp that will be like a whale home. He comes to these certain types of ice edges and sometimes sleeps on the edge of the ice.
So Gordon, I'm going to stop you there because I think you can talk for a long time. And what we may do is try through Deanna to offer you a blog post, because this is a fascinating topic, and I think the fact that you're doing it with remotely sensed data is really useful. So we'll come back to you on that later on. Now I'd like to move to, and thank you again. Now I'd like to move to Einar Bjørgo, who is director at UNOSAT, and that's part of UNITAR. Einar's going to speak about satellite imagery in support of disaster risk reduction for Indigenous communities. So if we can show Einar's presentation, please.
So my name is Einar Bjørgo. I'm the director of UNOSAT with the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. I'm very pleased to be able to be here with you today and speak about how we use technology to support indigenous societies. I'm also very thankful for GEO for giving me this opportunity to present to you here today. What I want to speak to you about today is the use of satellite imagery and how we use this to improve disaster risk reduction, in particular towards indigenous communities. But first, a little bit of background on UNOSAT. We are a program within the Division for Satellite Analysis and Applied Research with the UN Institute for Training and Research based in Geneva in Switzerland. We became operational back in 2001, and we are one of the few agencies, I would say, within the UN who's fully dedicated to satellite imaging analysis and capacity development. So being able to transfer our own internal skills to especially developing countries is something that we have been doing for a long, long time. And we are also very proud because we have our IT infrastructure hosted at CERN. So we also have the fantastic IT support from our colleagues over at CERN here in Geneva as well. This technology is really something that is cross-cutting when it comes to the sustainable development agenda. So just to highlight that, the little icon you see, that satellite imagery is supporting all the pillars of the Agenda 2030, peace, planet, people, and prosperity. Why satellite imagery, you may ask? Well, it has several benefits. One of the benefits is that it provides you with objective information. Other benefits include covering inaccessible areas. I think this is of particular importance when we talk about indigenous societies and communities. Also, that you can get information in near real time is extremely important. And as well, going back in time, looking at the historical record, because also indigenous communities means that they have been there for a very, very long time. And of course, satellite imagery will not be able to go that far back, but still being able to give, in certain cases at least, a good trend of what has been happening in the last 40 years or so. Today, we can also have very high levels of details in this type of data, down to 30 centimeter, what we call resolution, or let's say the level of detail you're able to depict in an image. Also very important is that the images are time-stamped. From our side, we are, as I mentioned, headquartered here in Geneva, but we also have offices in Bangkok, in Nairobi, and in New York. And thanks to the activities that we're talking about today, we also have a presence in Fiji, in Vanuatu, and in the Solomon Islands. Now, this has been made possible thanks to the IPP Common Sensing project. This is a project that is financed by the UK Space Agency, and it's really about building climate resilience within small island nations. And so how do we do that? Well, we are doing that by being present in the countries. And I think this is extremely important. Although we work with remote sensing, being able to be present in the countries, to learn from the societies there, and have an interaction with the people that are living there and have been living there for centuries, this really makes all the difference. And that is how we can provide, I would say, targeted and well-defined solutions together. So here's an example of a training we did for a provincial emergency response team in the Solomon Islands. And we are able to, based on that, learn from them and inform them about what satellite imagery technologies can do in order to help them being better prepared. This is also important. It's always done upon a request. So when we work, we typically have a good dialogue, and we're able to see together with the authorities and the local societies as well what is needed. So by doing that, we're able to really reach out to a wide range of communities. Even in these situations, communities that are, located very far away, also from the capital in these places and in these countries. So even we can go all the way to the outer islands. It's important to go there and speak to the people and understand their needs. But this is something that we have been working on for here with the Fijian government, and capturing stories and unique challenges that those societies are facing. And in this case, it was to prepare for another cyclone season. A specific example then of how we are able to do this is to look at satellite imagery and have a dialogue, as I said, with the societies and with the local leaders as well. And by doing that, we're able to come up with fact-based information. So being able to locate communities at risk, such as this one, really located on the coast here, we're able to, together with, in this case, the Ministry of Economy and the Climate Adaptation Unit, we are able then to document, what needs to be done, and that it is within, let's say, a danger zone, a hazard zone. And so this type of information then can be fed back, and again, being able to have informed decisions being taken at the local and regional level. Other ways that we're working with societies is that we are informing them about the existence of this technology. And of course, once the cyclone season starts, these communities are very, very much at risk. So we're able to, thanks to satellite imagery technologies, we're able to develop these type of dashboards that you see, where we're, thanks to the imagery analysis, we can easily analyze how many, for example, houses are destroyed, and thereby being able to support much better the vulnerable population in the outer islands. So again, here you can see that this is in Vanuatu. We're able to really define what has been damaged and have a sort of a almost real-time update of the various structures that have been damaged, where they are, how many people are inside the affected areas, and coupling that also with the information that comes from the government, who have also done field assessments. So being able to show this type of damage is extremely important. Here's an example from Fiji. Again, you can see the map location where the island is located, really reaching out to the furthest communities. And we are able to, thanks to the imagery that have global coverage, we are then able to show and analyze damage also on the outer islands, so that we are able to inform the government as well as the regional actors. So this is also thanks to the collaboration with the International Space Charter that we're able to provide this kind of very useful information. So this was just to give you a quick overview of how we typically are able to work with indigenous communities, learn from them, and also being able to provide them with much needed information for disaster risk reduction. I'm very happy to be able to continue here being on the panel and have a fruitful discussion around this thematic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Einar. Tusen takk. You talked about being present in countries, what's needed by local societies, and capturing stories and challenges. So that's quite a lot of experience. Based on what you've done in your experience, what do you think is preventing the uptake of satellite information in low and middle income countries, despite the work of UNISAT and others?
I think one of the challenges is exactly this, truly understanding the need. Often, what works in one place, one thing can work well in another place, and that's not necessarily the case. And then it's all about also, reaching the decision makers, because one thing is that you can have very good information available, but if it's only used at the technical level and it doesn't reach the decision makers, if they're not really aware of it, then that is definitely a hampering factor. So that is something that we have to be very mindful of when you develop this type of services, let's say, because in the end, that's what they are. It is all about both building technical capacity, lasting technical capacity, but also very much informing decision makers, because again, they need to know what is possible to do. And what we have seen when that has been successful is that the information is really being used, and the effects are very, very good. Also, in this particular project that I mentioned, what in the end here we want to do is to make the countries more resilient to climate change by having better access to climate funding. Because today, access to climate funding is extremely competitive. And especially these smaller countries, the small island states, they do not have enough capacity to do that. So whenever one has to reach out and try to get funding, for example, from the Green Climate Fund and things like that, it can be very, very difficult, especially also for adaptation measures. And we work also with the Commonwealth Secretariat. They have their Climate Finance Access Hub that are specialists on this. And that is also a very important, I would say, combination of tools. So by combining people with a specialization in climate finance with facts-based information from satellite imagery analysis, then they can really use that and thereby making those proposals for funding much more notable and successful. So that is in the end the goal where we want to go. But of course, to do so, yes, you need to be there working with the government and not just come on a small mission, but actually sit there with them for years, really understanding the way they work.
So Einar, I'm going to ask you a few more questions if you can answer them a bit more briefly, just so I can move on. One is from NASA Langley Globe Clouds. Has there been any work with citizen science or education programs like the Globe program? And a second, sort of related, more about partnership, is are you working with WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, in particular their regional climate center? So Globe Clouds and WMO.
Yeah, so we work in this specific product. We're not working directly with NASA, but we reach out to the regional entities. There's SPC, Pacific Disaster Center as well, out of Hawaii. We've been working with. We have been working with, of course, local universities. So we try to really make this technology more useful and integrated into their lectures as well. So we're definitely reaching out to that part of society as well.
Okay, so Einar, if you just look in the chat for Blue Jeans for the speakers, you'll see some other questions. I'm going to move on and we maybe come back at the end if we have time. So okay. Thank you. Thanks again. So now we're going to hear from Yanua Vargas Tanchimia, who's an Indigenous reporter and filmmaker from the Ecuadorian Amazon. Yanua will highlight Shuar women, decisions and actions as entrepreneurs, of sustainable tourism for territorial defence and mitigating climate change. So we're going to have two videos. The first one is Yanua speaking, and the second one you'll see. Okay.
Soy Yanua Vargas del pueblo Shuar de la Amazonía ecuatoriana. Quiero contarles las decisiones y las acciones que estamos realizando en nuestra Amazonía. La no tala indiscriminada de los bosques que se encuentran cerca a los caudales de nuestros ríos, porque esas son nuestra fuente de alimentación, cuidado que le debemos. Ya no la construcción de viviendas cerca a los ríos, cerca a los deslizamientos de tierras. Pero también estamos conscientes de que para hablar del cambio climático y la reducción de riesgos, hay que disminuir el uso de plásticos. También hacer un llamado a las empresas extractivas. Ya no más daño a nuestros bosques, a nuestra selva, que a grito pide que paremos esa situación. La minería, la hidroeléctrica y las petroleras, que por años han venido destruyendo a nuestra Amazonía. También hacer conscientes de que las grandes ciudades, los grandes países, para llamarse desarrollados, han tenido que saquear, han tenido que destruir a los pueblos que por años han estado habitando. Y eso no es el desarrollo sostenible, no es desarrollo, como ustedes lo pueden llamar. También cada día nosotros plantamos árboles que también nos puedan alimentar, que también pueda darnos oxígeno y sombra. Porque si talamos los árboles indiscriminadamente, mañana no tendremos sombra y nos quejaremos del calentamiento global, lo que tiene que ver con el cambio climático. Y por eso hago un llamado a la comunidad internacional a sumarse a esta lucha para la defensa de nuestros territorios, la defensa de nuestros bosques, de nuestra selva, que están habitando nosotros como mujeres, niños, adultos, las sabias, que ahí guardamos y ahí cosechamos cada uno de nuestra alimentación. Y por ende somos conscientes y seguimos cuidando y seguiremos haciendo. Y que se sumen a esta lucha, que no solamente el cuidado del planeta y el bienestar de cada uno de nosotros se requiere a un grupo, sino es un trabajo de todos y de todas. Gracias.
And so now we should play the other video. We have the second video to play. So in the meantime, while we seem to be doing something with the other video, Yanua, I'd like to ask you a question. Oh, I'll come back after the video.
Kuwa chitya bi mesit no wima tengya no kuwa chitya bi menga kandengya unis na bertitya vinya uchichirwa mesit no ma wimya no ti urukaya vinya uchichirwa Uchichiru, mesit noma, wemianyano, ti urukaya, vinya uchichiru, uchichira, hai. Nukuwa chitya, bi mesit no wima tengya, nukuwa chitya. Vi mânga cam denghea, unis n-am titya, vinya uciciroa, măset noma, mia no, ti urukaya, vinya uciciroa, măset noma, mia no, ti urukaya, vinya uciciroa, hai, hai. Nukuwa chitya, bi măset no wăma tenghea. Nukuwa chitya, bi mânga cam denghea. Unis n-am bărtitea, vinya uciciroa, măset noma, mia no, ti urukaya, vinya uciciroa, măset noma, mia no, ti urukaya, vinya uciciroa, hai.
So thank you for that. I think I could see you singing there, Yanua. It seemed like you knew all the words. So you made a very strong plea for extractive companies to stop worsening the climate situation, and I have two questions related to that. One is, you mentioned sustainable development, and this is not part of sustainable development. So how do we explain sustainable development to these companies and to people who are ruining the planet? And the second question is, what's the role of women in doing so? You get it? Did you get my question?
Hi, I'm the translator. It's raining really hard right here, and it's a little hard to hear you. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Absolutely. So Yanua talked about extractive companies. They have to stop their activities that are worsening climate change. So in the video, she talked about how this is not sustainable development. So the first part of the question is, how do we explain real sustainable development to these companies? And the second part is, in particular, the role of women in doing so. Is that clear?
Buenos días, todos que me escuchan. Voy a hablar muy despacio para... Yo hablo muy rápido como la lora. Entonces voy a hablar despacio para poder compartir y responder a su pregunta. Good morning. So I'm going to speak as slowly as possible. Sometimes I normally speak really fast like a parrot, so I'm going to try and speak as slowly as possible. Primero, para hablar sobre el desarrollo sostenible en ciudades, empezamos un grupo pequeño realizando actividades normales que son como que tienen que ver con la soberanía alimentaria.
So in our communities, we talk about sustainable development. We start out small, and we start out in small groups, and we focus on things that we already do. One of the things that we do is the food sovereignty.
Entonces, que tiene que ver como la cosecha, la siembra de las plantas que sirven para nuestra alimentación. Tiene que ver también con las plantas medicinales para nuestra salud.
So we have to see what plants that we're harvesting, the plants that we're seeding. We look at our medicinal plants that we use that take care of our health.
Entonces, lo que hacen las compañías extractivas, mineras, petroleras, es como dar, como a cambio, destruyo este bosque, pero te doy como dinero en efectivo y que en eso no lleva a algo que sea sostenible, que algo que se pueda vivir, que algo que se pueda plasmar como pueblos.
So these extractivism companies that come into our territories, what they do is they come and they offer us money. This isn't sustainable. They're not focusing on the activities that we do on a day-to-day basis.
Entonces, el papel de las mujeres frente a esta situación que estamos viendo, que estamos palpando, hay un grupo de mujeres que aún no estamos como recibiendo este impacto, pero sí podemos ver de cercanía a otras mujeres que a veces tienen que ser desplazados de sus propios territorios que han habitado por mucho tiempo. Entonces, seguimos como agrupándonos, juntándonos, qué es lo que podemos no solamente esperar de ellos, porque a pesar de que tengamos buenas propuestas de sostenibilidad, las compañías petroleras siempre van a estar destruyendo, y con el gobierno que tenemos, porque siempre están negociando con ellos.
So the role of the women come together and they come together and create their own proposals. They wait for the companies, to answer them, but they can't wait anymore. No action is being taken. So they come together with their own proposals and analyze their own sustainable initiatives.
Entonces, lo que hemos hecho frente a esto, viendo y juntándonos con los proyectos de emprendimiento enfocado en el desarrollo sostenible, porque estamos conscientes de que juntándonos con un grupo pequeño que estamos conscientes de cuidar nuestra selva, de cuidar nuestros bosques, hemos dicho y nos hemos enfocado al desarrollo sostenible, que no solamente de palabras suene bonito, sino que también son las acciones, la reforestación de los lugares que han sido deforestados por el tema de ganadería. Entonces, como tiene que ver también con la compartir de las plantas nativas que hay en nuestra selva y en algunos lugares han sido desaparecidos.
So, the small groups of women who are focusing on combating deforestation, the women aren't writing pretty words, they're writing the truth. They focus a lot on sustainable development. They work on focusing on the sharing of medicinal plants. And they are also facing deforested areas that have been affected by cattle ranching as well.
¿A qué me refiero cuando estoy comentando sobre esta situación? Porque es como un grupo grande de todas estas compañías extractivas y a otro grupo pequeño que con selva grande, pero gente muy poco que está como en esta guerra que es para mitigar el cambio climático. Pero sin embargo, al decir desarrollo sostenible o turismo sostenible, no vamos a construir edificios con la misma situación que están haciendo en las grandes ciudades, más bien con las propias herramientas, usando nuestras propias tecnologías, usando nuestras propias herramientas que nos da la selva, que es amigable con nuestra selva. Entonces, ahí es de turismo sostenible, que este grupo nos hemos enfocado a esto. Y entonces es un punto fuerte de las mujeres, fortalecer las capacidades y habilidades que van a sumar a esta situación para como parar esta situación, porque sé que no es como con esta situación lo vamos a decir basta, pero sí son estas acciones que nos permiten que podemos mostrar y también documentar para que los otros países también puedan ver que estamos haciendo.
So she says, so what are we referring to sustainable development? We try to keep the group small at first because a lot of workshops that come to our territory aren't really facing the situation of mitigating climate change. When we talk about sustainable development or even ecotourism, or what they call as sustainable tourism, we don't mean that we want to build buildings or work with situations in big cities. We'd rather use, or sorry, we don't want to use things that come from the cities. We want to use our own tools. We want to use our own resources, our own resources that are friendly to our jungle, that don't cause damage to the nature.
So can I just ask then, if Yanoa can answer briefly, we have a request, it's a two-part request. One I think she'll be quite pleased to hear, which is how can we donate? Is there a local organisation that if some of us are interested in giving money, we can donate to? And second part is how can the broader international community, such as the Geo-Indigenous Alliance, support you? Did you get that?
Sí. Está preguntando cómo se puede apoyar, donar, dónde se puede dirigir el de Alianza de Indígena.
Ya. Nosotras con este emprendimiento nos hemos podido sumar, que es con un gobierno que es un poquito más, que es cercano. Nosotros le llamamos aquí parroquial. Ahí está el que está liderando, es una mujer, entonces ella ha sido como una punto fuerte para nosotras, entonces nos hemos reunido con ella y también hemos hecho como un encuentro de todos los coordinadores y coordinadoras de cada uno de los emprendimientos para que nos hemos juntado y también hablar sobre esta situación, porque estamos conscientes de que estamos conservando nuestra selva, lo poco que nos queda, así sería de expresar, porque eso es lo que realmente está sucediendo. Entonces, estamos como juntándonos cada uno de los grupos de los emprendimientos para ver y hacer alianzas, de qué manera podemos participar o también tener como una cercanía para el tema de fondos. Porque si estamos conscientes es también, si estamos hablando de mitigar el cambio climático, hacer el uso también de las energías, por ejemplo, el panel solar. Ya no estaríamos apostando a la energía como típico. Entonces, estamos ya encaminando, ya nuestros emprendimientos tienen sus estructuras, sus planes en las cuales cada uno se va desarrollando, pero con el mismo fin y el mismo objetivo, que es el cuidado de nuestros bosques y que también ayudan a sostener y disminuir el cambio climático. Entonces, ellos querían saber
¿Dónde dirige las fondos? ¿Dónde se puede apurar donaciones?
¿Puedo darle el nombre? Sí, puede, disculpe, sí pueden, somos un grupo de emprendimientos de nuestra zona. Yo puedo dar mi contacto para poder organizarnos mejor.
Yeah.
Ujú.
So we are a group of local Indigenous businesses, and we have made an association focused on the same vision of taking care of our forest. And so I can share my contact so that anyone who's interested in donating to our association they can contact me to find out further information how to donate.
Fantastic. So look, if you can share in the chat, if you can share those details in the chat, and I'm sure Deanna has them, or we can get them from Mario, that would be great. So unfortunately, I need to move on, but I think we can also do a blog post here as well to help you share the information and to promote the activities and to get more international support. So thank you again, muchas gracias. And I'm going to move on now. And our final speaker in this session is Leif Jon Fosse, who's a senior advisor with NICFI, the Norwegian International Climate and Forest Initiative in the Ministry of Climate and Environment in Norway. The video is from Sveinung Rotevatn, the Minister of Climate and Environment for Norway. So it will be the Minister doing the video, and then Leif has the pleasure of answering questions. So if we can play the video, please, that'd be great.
Deforestation is both a local and a global threat. Locally, because forests that provide food, medicines and livelihoods for millions of indigenous peoples and local communities are lost. Along with the forests, we also lose the traditional knowledge that indigenous peoples and local communities have accumulated over thousands of years about how to manage these forests sustainably. Globally, we lose carbon storage and stabilization of the climate, purification of air and water, and recycling of nutrients. Still, an area larger than Belgium was deforested only last year, when more than 3.7 million hectares of primary tropical forest was lost. The science is clear. The world cannot reach the Sustainable Development Goals, nor the Paris Agreement, without halting deforestation and increasing forest restoration. Remaining natural forests cannot be safeguarded without recognizing the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. Indigenous peoples and local communities manage half of the world's lands, yet governments recognize their ownership of just 10%. Norway has, since 2008, supported efforts to reduce tropical deforestation with $300 million every year. A significant part of this funding goes to securing land rights for indigenous peoples and local communities and supporting their participation in global climate and biodiversity talks. Information is power, and remote sensing and satellite images can be a great source of information. It can cover large areas, and it can provide information that is consistent over time. Not least, enabling equal access to information will help level the playing field for indigenous peoples and local communities. This requires packaging this information easy-to-use ways, such as Global Forest Watch, and which can be operated from handheld devices, such as mobile phones. High-resolution satellite imagery can be used to detect illegal logging or roads, to map and monitor forest lands, and to document land rights. But access to such data has been limited. These images have been too expensive to allow widespread use. They have been hampered by restrictive licenses. They have been complicated to use. Norway is removing this bottleneck by making these data available to all for free. Norway intends this to be a resource for forest country governments and everyone else interested in contributing to halting tropical deforestation. We will continue to work with our partner countries and civil society to turn the data into useful information and to make information easily accessible to those that need it. Those who can manage forests more effectively with this information, and those with the power to address drivers of deforestation. People such as yourselves. Thank you.
So, Leif, that's again another very powerful message and very useful coming. I think at the political level from a minister, I think this is what we need to get more, and we want to get more ministers doing this. I know that, and Sveinung kind of alluded to it, that you've recently put $45 million into a program that will support activities through KSAT, the Norwegian company, Airbus, the European company, and Planet, the US company. So I don't want to go into that specific project, but I'd like to, from your perspective, working in the tropical region and working with Indigenous communities, what does this mean? What does providing this access to the open data, to taking away some of those restrictions and licensing that he was talking about, and based on what you've heard already today about, working with local communities, listening to stories, how do we bring all of that together? What do you think this enables?
Thank you. Let me say a few words about the potential of this remote sensing data that is now being made available, and a few things about access. And I think some of the main potential to Indigenous peoples and local communities is for their governments to improve law enforcement and improve policies to reduce deforestation. Governments can improve measurements of forest emissions and thus position themselves better to access international payments for emissions reductions of high quality. Now, civil society can use these data to keep companies and governments accountable. And companies, on their part, can better monitor their supply chains. And investors can better manage the deforestation risks in their portfolio. And finally, and most importantly, Indigenous peoples and local communities can document land claims and sacred places, monitor illegal logging, mining, petroleum, as we heard about in the case of the Shuar, illegal deforestation, as well as incursions onto their territories. That's just some of the potential in terms of how Indigenous peoples and local communities can make use of these data. Over to you. Thank you.
So it's interesting that both you and Einar have talked about access to international payments and international funds. Because it seems, in my experience, it seems to be the same people coming up in cycles, Norway, Germany, depending on the government, other countries. Do you think that, well, first of all, the program that you've just announced, one of the questions that's just come in is, when will that program run until? So I don't know if you want to answer that. And then the second part is, how can countries include information from satellite imagery in their reporting to UNFCCC, so the UN's climate body, so that it's compliant with the UNFCCC process and the methodology from IPCC? I hope people understand all these acronyms, but these are basically the bodies that are managing the process to save the planet around climate change. So if you don't, we can have another session going through the wonderful acronyms of the UN. But if you know what they are, it would be good to get an answer live.
So I think the main point here is that we have moved on from conservation to providing incentives for states, for communities, for companies to do the right thing, to level the playing field between communities and the commercial forces that exploit or make use of their forest. So I think the main idea here is to level the playing field, to put this technology into the hands of those that need it, like the minister said, so that if this can democratize in a way, remote sensing data, providing more accurate data to people who can make use of it, that's the sort of idea here. In terms of what the incentives are, they are different for different stakeholders, of course. States will perhaps see it in their interest to provide more accurate data, to access more valuable incentives for keeping the forest standing. Forest, as I referred to, may want to use it to document their land rights so as to stand stronger against commercial operators who would like to make use of their land. Just some of the opportunities.
Okay, so I guess I can tell everyone that GEO will be working with NICFI next year to sort of explain the program that's happening, to raise awareness more globally, to explain what it can enable, and just basically promote and highlight this investment from Norway in Earth observations. So thank you, Norway. Thank you, Leif. Tusen takk. And now we're going to move to the lightning talks. So the first one up is Bradley Brower. You may recognize the name. He's a young subsistence hunter from the Alaskan Arctic. So let's move quickly to Bradley, please.
Hello, everybody. My name is Bradley Brower. I'm a 20-year-old Inupiaq from Barrow, Alaska, also known as Kelly. Big part of my culture here in Barrow is whaling, and a lot of my subsistence activities involves whaling. And when we're doing our spring hunt on the ice, there's a lot of factors that you have to pay attention to. You have to know which way the wind direction's blowing. You need to know what the ice is doing, what the currents, and which way is, so you know what's going on. So I use a lot of modern technology like GPS, VHF, and those AM, FM radios, so I could check so I'm aware of which way the wind is blowing, and so I could have communications with town and other people and other whaling crews. Being out there you have a lot of responsibilities. You have to take care of your captain's gear, and also you have to be watching out for dangerous animals, like polar bears. And it takes a lot of responsibility and a lot of work to be successful out there, and it's all in efforts to feed our community. Usually when I'm out there, we depend on east winds, and that's when it opens up the lead so we could try and go hunting. But when it turns to west winds, the ice comes in and it could be very dangerous, and sometimes we have to rush to town immediately because it could be life-threatening. And so we're always on our feet and always aware 24/7. We mix science and traditional knowledge so we could have that more advanced feature, and could so I like to use my GPS and all the modern technology to help me be more capable to do more things, and I mix that with my traditional knowledge. And so one situation that happened to us is the ice was coming in and we had to pack up all of our stuff, and so before the ice come in and demolish us, all of our stuff, we had to haul all of it back to town really quick in efforts to save all of our gear. So that being said, I encourage all the indigenous hunters and all the people around the world to always be aware, and to always let other people know that you guys are out there in the wilderness, and appreciate your guys' time, and I enjoyed making this video.
Thank you, Bradley. Gordon, is Bradley there with you? Are you both together?
I've been trying to find Bradley, so he's been building an apartment, and his hours are upside down with all this COVID going on. So, and the hunker down orders up here, we're not able to go to work. So,
well, look, just pass on our regards, and I'm really pleased he enjoyed making the video. That's great. Maybe we can give him a little cameo role in your blog post later on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. Okay, so now we're going to move to Richard, and I'm going to murder this second name. Tiuch? I don't know. It looks Dutch, but I'm probably completely wrong. Richard's Professor of Geoinformatics and Disaster Risk Reduction at the University of Portsmouth, which is much easier for me to say. So let's show Richard's video, and then we may have some questions for Richard. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Richard Tew from the University of Portsmouth in the UK. I'll be talking about how we're using remote sensing to detect and monitor illegal gold mining in Choco region of Colombia. The project is funded by the UK Economic and Social Research Council, and these are our partners shown here. And the background to the project is the very rapid increase in mechanized gold mining within Choco region in recent years. That led to Colombia's Constitutional Court ruling in 2016 that the river and the peoples living along the river have biocultural rights, and that ruling calls for the protection, conservation, maintenance and restoration of the Atrato River. Choco is a biodiversity hotspot. It's the area shown here on this map of Colombia in red. The area sits between the Andes and the Pacific and the Caribbean Sea. It's drained by the Atrato River, and it has, within the Atrato Basin, higher levels of biodiversity than you find in the Amazon Basin. Unfortunately, it's also an ecocide hotspot. The area has a lot of gold deposits, and these have been mined extensively and illegally. It's a very poor region and a very remote region where it's difficult to police these activities. Notice also the cloud in this aerial photograph taken from a plane flying over the Rio Quito, the area circled in red on this map. It's one of the wettest places on the planet, so it's very difficult to use conventional optical and infrared satellite imagery to monitor what's happening. We have to fall back on using radar imagery. And here we're using the Sentinel-1 imagery from the European Space Agency. So this first image is a photo taken from an aeroplane looking over the Rio Quito. We can see 3 dredges lined up here, progressively eating into the sediment of the river to extract the gold, while ahead of them the rainforest has been chopped down and cleared to make way for the dredges. Using the radar remote sensing, we can track that devastation. We see here the radar images from August, September, October, and October-November 2017. They have been merged into this final image to give a color-coded change map, and we can see that the areas in red are the areas of deforestation and mining that occurred during August-September 2017, and the areas here in yellow are the areas of deforestation and mining that occurred between September and November 2017. This sort of a map is very useful and can be used as evidence by the peoples and by who want to bring court cases against this illegal activity along the river. To conclude, the Satellite One radar imagery is freely available, and it's a very reliable way for detecting land cover features and land cover changes through cloud cover. The satellite-derived maps of illegal mining sites produced at monthly or even weekly intervals have been provided to Colombia government agencies to assist them with the policing of the illegal mining activity in this area. The Choco River Stories project, of which this research is part, is providing local capacity building to improve community resilience with training on how to use land cover change maps using satellite radar imagery. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And I now know it's Chew, which is much easier than the nonsense I was saying. You talked, I think I heard you talk about biocultural rights. Can you just explain a little bit more about that? And is that something that maybe could be applied to some of the other situations we've heard about? Is this something that we should be thinking more broadly about?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Good, good. Yes, it is rather unusual. There are very few rivers in the world that have been given legal rights. The Ganges is clearly one. There are, I think, one or two rivers in New Zealand with the Maori that have been given similar legal rights. So it was quite a breakthrough with Colombia in 2016 when their constitutional court gave these biocultural rights to the Atrato River, recognizing that the peoples living on the river were so intrinsically linked in with the river, as was the wildlife and the ecosystems that they were in, that they all merited protection. And this, at the end of the day, given that Choco is the most remote and the poorest of the departments of Colombia, is particularly important. The levels of policing are, let's say, difficult in Choco. So it's, I think, the area with the most severe illegal mining activity. It's very difficult to police it, and therefore anything that can be done by the local municipalities, by the locals, indigenous peoples, NGOs, to put pressure on the government authorities to improve the level of policing is very much needed. And there have been two occasions over the last year where we provided this satellite radar imagery processed to show the locations and the dates and the distribution of mining, where that's then gone forward to the ombudsman in Colombia or for other organizations at government level that are responsible for enforcing this ruling by the Constitutional Court.
Thank you. Richard, you may know that UN Environment, the UNEP, the UN Environment Programme, works on something called the Minamata Convention. Mm-hmm. So it's the Minamata Convention Mercury, and satellite data can be very useful for monitoring mercury for local gold mines. Is that something that have you been involved in that?
Yeah, our colleagues at Glasgow University on this project, Glasgow, the lead university on this, they've carried out various analyses of the mercury, but it's mainly been done by the University of Cartagena on the Caribbean coast of Colombia, and they've tracked fish and also the hairs of people. So it's been looked at, but at first we thought it would be something that would be significant from the point of view of detecting the areas of mining, knowing how the gold is often then collected into a mercury amalgam and then processed further to separate the gold. But it's probably the third wettest place on the planet. I think over 9,000 millimeters of rainfall a year. So there's a general process of washing out of the mercury in the areas where the mining occur. And the main concentrations of mercury tend to then be in the nearby towns or the nearby city of Quibdó, where they found very high levels of mercury around the areas where there are jewelry shops. And that's the final stage for separating the mercury from the gold. So at street level, that tends to be the worst case for pollution. So we've not taken this into the realm of trying to apply remote sensing in the field. I think there's been some airborne remote sensing done by the likes of the Carnegie Institute, I think, which has been trying to pick up using airborne multispectral or hyperspectral remote sensing features in the wastewater from mining areas, say in Peru. But we've not followed that line. We're sticking very much to the freely available satellite imagery, and our goal is to get that imagery used much more widely in remote areas such as Choco, and then start to generate maps locally that can be produced by local organizations, probably starting with Choco Technical University, maybe in linking then with the local diocese and with the NGOs for the indigenous peoples and the Afro-Caribbean peoples.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive, and it's great to see that you're able to make use of the Copernicus program and the Sentinels. That's very good to hear. Before I go to there was a question for Life about how long the Norwegian program would last, and the answer is the data will be available for a first period of 2 years, with the possibility for an extension for a further 2 years, just for those who are interested. The next speaker is someone I've actually only ever seen on social media, so it's kind of nice when your worlds collide. Valerie Graw is from Ruhr University in Bochum, RUB, and she's talking about access to renewable energy for remote Indigenous communities. So if we can have Valerie's lightning talk, please.
Indigenous communities often lack access to basic services such as electricity. We work together with indigenous communities in the Ecuadorian Amazon who often live in high poverty and are located very remote, with no access to electricity and information, and also face increasing difficulties with local disturbances. Renewable energies, therefore, are a solution for many of them. In the Sustainable Energy for Amazonian project, we use satellite imagery to get information about the status and the change of the study areas. Socioeconomic data from census information was integrated, but as this data does not reflect the situation in the indigenous communities, we used participatory mapping via the app GeoFarmer. Here, local indigenous technicians carried out household surveys by themselves with mobile devices and also added reference points that helped us to validate our remote sensing analysis. All this information led to the development of rural electrification plans. Workshops were held to reach out to the communities, explain the project idea, and discuss open questions so the community could decide whether they want to participate or not. At GeoCentro at USFTU, the local technicians were trained on how to use the application before they then left into the remote communities. Remote communities, sometimes only accessible by boat or long car drives, where they started then the data collection. The data collection was carried out in total in 58 communities and 775 households. The local technicians added self-drawn maps with a high level of detail to the data collection, which was mainly carried out in the mobile application, which was accessible by all project members. Earth observation-based information and survey data were linked to know in the end the size, location, and disperseness of the communities. Using the Tesselled Cap Wetness Index in combination with survey data helped to estimate the population density in the study areas. This information, together with the settlement projection model until 2030 and the household information on electricity needs, led to a spatially explicit energy provision model that in the end helped us to decide whether a community needs a solar standalone, a solar mini-grid, or if it should be connected to the grid. Workshops were conducted in addition to conferences where indigenous leaders and national actors were brought to one table to discuss the current challenges. Also, local technicians were trained on how to use the satellite images and learned how the data they collected in the communities were embedded in the electricity model. The project was depending on an interdisciplinary team, tools and actions to reach out with a transdisciplinary approach. Understanding electricity needs and develop a rural electrification plan needs to involve those that are addressed, to not leave them behind on the way to sustainability.
Thank you, Valerie. I was trying to find the words for the question that I wanted to ask you, and you said it right at the end, transdisciplinary approach. So we've heard a lot of people talk about communities, and that was very strong in your lightning talk. You talked about remote communities, you talked about participatory mapping, you talked about Earth observations, you talked about settlement models, you talked about energy and electricity models. How on earth did you manage to pull all this together and convince all the different parties that the information was valid, was accurate, was meaningful, was useful? What was the process you went through that maybe others in this community can learn from? What were the kind of the pros and the cons?
I mean, we work closely together with Amazon GISnet, which is already a network of local technicians, and that was quite helpful having USFQ as a partner in this project to reach out to the communities. And what was really important was capacity building throughout the whole project. So working together closely with the communities, but also involving stakeholders, national actors continuously. So we had workshops which we carried out, and we tried to involve everyone from the beginning until the end. So also explaining how are the data used, how are the satellite information used. And we're trying also to convince the national actors to use more Earth observation and in combination with participatory mapping.
So, thank you. One of the questions that's come in is how can we make these projects sustainable over time and not just a one-off initiative?
Actually, sustainability means that we have to involve a lot of people, and it also means that these projects are taken over by regional organizations, taken over by, national actions actually. And always including those that should be addressed, what I actually mentioned in the end, because that for us was actually the key point. Otherwise, we would not be able to get that data.
Thank you. Vielen Dank. I don't know if you're German, but I'll say vielen Dank anyway.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to move to our next lightning talk, which is Melinda Adams, who's a PhD student at the Department of Native American Studies at the University of California, Davis. This lightning talk is Keepers of the Flame.
Indigenous peoples and the roles they play in combating climate change is rarely considered in public discourse. In California, virtually everything related to fire is on the rise. Acres burned, lives lost, and costs to fight the blazes. These recent trends are broadly consistent with those expected from anthropogenic climate change, which in and of itself is tied to colonial practices hinging on the dispossession of indigenous land and resources. Since time immemorial, Native American tribes have always conducted cultural fire as a spiritual and ecological approach to tending and caring for our lands. Cultural fires are small area fires demonstrated using traditional ecological knowledge. In the 1800s, the United States government began suppressing and outlawing the use of cultural fire, and as a result, practitioners and firekeepers have been unable to burn due to these continued suppressive activities. The loss of fire in American landscape is inextricably linked with the history of federal Indian policy that removed indigenous people, therein indigenous land management practices. In consequence, the appearance of California landscape has shifted tremendously and is susceptible to prolonged drought seasons and catastrophic wildfire. Recently in California, there has been a movement of indigenous fire practitioners reclaiming their land stewardship roles by conducting cultural fire demonstrations. This resurgence has been met with apprehension and caution from various government actors, including CAL FIRE, the U.S. Forestry Department, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. In contrast, Australian intergovernmental agencies and indigenous peoples have established Indigenous Protected Areas, IPAs, to conduct ceremonial fires. Australian stakeholders at the government have re-recognized that if managed correctly, fire can have numerous benefits for people and nature. The overarching goal of our work, Keepers of the Flame, Revitalizing Indigenous Cultural Fire as Climate Action at UC Davis, is to understand and contribute to decision-making and governance mechanisms that facilitate Indigenous fire science as an adaptive strategy. Indigenous traditional burning may be applied singularly or as a complementary approach with other ecosystem restoration practices. Focusing on Northern California, this work supports 1. Analysis of policy and governance mechanisms that facilitate cultural burns, 2. Conduct a series of collaborative multi-stakeholder traditional cultural burn efforts, 3. An evaluation of preliminary social, political, and ecological outcomes of these burn efforts, and 4. Documentation of lessons learned and best practices. This project advances partnerships between UC Davis and the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center and tribal nations and communities, in addition to strengthening relationships between tribal nations and communities who are revitalizing cultural burning.
Thank you. Are you there, Melinda?
Hi, yes, it's 9:25 in the morning, so good morning, good afternoon. Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. So I just wanted to, we've heard a lot of different topics. The last one we talked about was a lot about community engagement. And this one, I'm very interested in what you were saying about the policy and governance mechanisms. And I just wanted to understand, are you proposing moving to the IPA model that Australia has or something similar? And then the second question is, could you maybe elaborate a bit more on the term you used, Indigenous fire science, and just explain to us a little bit more about that?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you for the two questions. So our governance model involves working with the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. So I'm sure people know in the United States we have these different situated climate vulnerability, climate mitigation, climate action centers that are enacted through our municipalities here in the United States. And so they have these climate risks assessments that they work with in populations overall. So there's specific task forces that work with Indigenous communities who, of course, are most vulnerable to these change in climatic patterns. And so we partnered with the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center that we belong to. And part of that is working on environmental policy to mitigate these types of environmental policies that have situated us to feel these effects of climate change. And as I said in the talk, fire is one of the main issues that we have here in California. We just had a record-breaking 4 million acres lost. And so we're working with Indigenous burn, or not Indigenous, just local and community burn networks for folks that use fire on their own private lands to reduce the fuel load that we have that's building up through our fire season. And so we're starting to engage in these conversations around policy at the state and federal level to try to introduce what our Indigenous fire practitioners call good fire, setting that good fire back to the ground. So I think that touches on the first question. On the second question, Indigenous fire science. And so I can sum that up in the best that I can in learning from our practitioners. I work with 3 different folks in 3 different areas of California that are starting to reintroduce Indigenous fire, cultural fire that's a more spiritual approach and more tending approach than just prescribed burning. Prescribed burns, as my practitioner told me, shared with me, the state, they burn and then they go. They come and they do this burn demonstration and then they leave. But us as Indigenous folks that are localized and embedded in these ecological communities, we meet before, we clean up before, we stack wood to locate the burn areas we're going to burn, and then we burn, and we have the community come out, everybody participates, everybody learns, everybody comes with a good heart, a good mind, and then we come back when it's all done. You know, we replant native species, we clean up any ash that's residual and work that back into the soil to aerate. So there's more of a tending and upkeeping and kinship building with the elements that we have as opposed to prescribed burn or fire science. And so that's what my practitioners have termed Indigenous fire science.
Fabulous. I've just learned a whole lot. I just have a very quick final question, which is someone called Lyric Prince, who's asking, are you able to comment on prescribed fire measures on the East Coast? And I presume that's the East Coast of the USA.
Oh, definitely. Yes. Our bicoastal region. Yes. So my work primarily concentrates in California, Northern California specifically. But what we're hoping to try to do in networking with these climate adaptation science centers is to reform policy on all levels, which includes, of course, the federal level, which would then encompass other states, other universities, other sets of land. And so that's definitely a long-term project that we have. And we know y'all are feeling the effects too of what we're starting to think of as wildfire season. You know, it's not just us on the West Coast that are affected. Of course, the fuel load buildup, the policies that are written in regard to fire and in regard to environmental policy, they're not working. And so Indigenous peoples are at the focal point of mitigating these policies and these procedures that would allow us to reclaim our land stewardship roles. So I think that's across the United States. There's a movement, the hashtag land back, the land back movement, not just physically giving the land back, but physically enabling us to tend and care for our lands that we've done for millennia, and for the other climate change effects that we've felt since time immemorial. So yes, that's definitely one of our long-term goals, is to connect with our Indigenous partners, or just cultural fire practitioners all across the United States.
Thanks again, Melinda. If you just look in the chat on Blue Jeans, you'll see a couple of other questions. There's a question just came in, but we need to move on. There's not time, so you might be able to just have a look at those yourself. Our next and final talk is from Christian Langer, who's at Martin Luther University in Halle-Wittenberg in Germany again. Hello, Christian. And Christian's going to talk, keeping on the fire theme, about wildfire monitoring in Madagascar. So let's go to Christian's talk, please.
So hello, everyone. My name is Christian Langer from the German Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research, IDEF, in Leipzig, Germany. And I welcome you to my lightning talk, Wildfire Monitoring in Madagascar. The Madagascar Fire Report app is a ready-to-use mobile web application and was the winning entry of the GEO's hack in 2018 to develop a biodiversity monitoring tool to motivate local patrols in Madagascar to engage with satellite images and contribute to in situ observations from the ground. This app allows park rangers in Madagascar to easily report information about a recent wildfire, and it's a very simple and mobile-friendly interface, allowing the park rangers to carry out their work in the field. Input parameters are provided as sliders with pictograms and for easy understanding, and also allows non-English speakers to use the interface. We embedded active fire hotspots from the last 24, 48 and 72 hours from the FIRMS data set. FIRMS is the NASA's fire information for resource management system, and this data can be visualized on the map. The user can also search and display web mapping services from the GEO Discovery Access Broker, and this in situ wildfire report by the park rangers is then uploaded to GEOS, and this allows anyone to take part in the information. Thank you for your attention. I'm showing you now a live demo of this mobile app. So you can see, you can search for any kinds of data set inside GEOS. We are fetching now a data set from Madagascar. We can visualize it on the map. We can display the last 24, 48, 72 hours from NASA, the last active fires. And here you can see that we can drag a wildfire on the map, and it displays automatically the latitude and longitude, the location. Here we can adjust the fire point, and the location automatically updates. We can set the fire magnitude, the flora damage and the fauna damage, and we can send this data to GEOS, and we can see here we are searching for the park ranger's name, in this case Hariso, and it queries, and GEOS displays all this information we just submitted to GEOS. And that's basically it. I hope you liked the demo. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, and thank you.
Thank you, Christian. I can't believe GEO's hack was 2 years ago. Where did 2018 go? How is this work connected with the Copernicus EMS, the emergency management service or system that, or like the global wildfire information system? Is there a link to that?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Yes, true. It was already 2 years ago when we did it, so time flies. But yes, yeah, we are connected this app with the WMS services from the GEO portal, and I checked recently. So we are fetching, I think, over 20. I don't know. So basically, we can fetch, let's say, all the 25 million records from GEOs, and this will contain as well web mapping services from Copernicus. So the answer, yes, if you are searching for Copernicus data, any kinds of data, let's say, from Copernicus, so you can visualize it as well.
Great.
But this little, yeah, sorry.
No, on you go.
So the main focus is to visualize, let's say, the active fires from NASA. So the active fires from the last 24, so to get always, let's say, always on the latest, the most recent fires globally. So the focus is more on that feature. So because if you are loading a WMS, it is more, it's an image, let's say an additional background image for the map. But the files, of course, they are more, makes more sense to just visualize the files instead of any other WMS, let's say.
And how do what was your local engagement? How did you work with the indigenous community in Madagascar?
Yeah, so this app was an entry for the hackathon, and in 2 years ago, and this example we have shown in the demonstration was the park ranger Hariso, and actually Hariso from Madagascar was a guy who setting up this challenge, and he encouraged us to do it. But I never spoke with him, unfortunately. So he just submitted this task, and we built for him. We developed for him his solution. But I never spoke with him in person, and
So you have a bit more work to do on that front.
Yeah, so it would be nice if I get in touch with him one time in person, but for now, unfortunately, it didn't happen.
Okay, well, thank you very much for participating and taking the time to make your lightning talk. And thank you to everyone. Thank you to all the people who applied, all the people who took the time to record the videos, who've joined us today, who've given us a huge amount to think about. We can't answer all the questions. The videos will all be available online. Everything will be on our website, and we can easily connect people who have questions with people who spoke, and we can connect everyone to the Geo-Indigenous Alliance. You will be pleased to hear that tomorrow is less me and more women. So we have the first session, which is women empowerment, which is at 3 p.m. Central European Time, CET. And that's Caroline Otiwa, who's from Women in GIS in Kenya. So Caroline will be your moderator for that session. And then we have food security at 5 p.m. Central European Time. And again, we have another fantastic woman doing that, Catherine Nicolembi from GeoGlam and University of Maryland and a few other accolades. So tune in again tomorrow and join us and give us your questions, give us your comments, give us your views. And thank you once again to everyone for participating today. Stay safe and sane. Thank you.